All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be going over building a full stack application, and we're going to create this full stack application with user authentication capabilities. So the first thing that I want to go into is in a little overview of our Django project. And first of all, I want you guys to notice my folder structure. So in this folder structure, I have this task manager, which is our project. We see that we have our settings PY and everything in there. If I continue going on forward, we have this user app, and this is the actual app of our project. Now I have this client task manager, and this client task manager is my React project. So everything lives inside the same directory. It's inside the same folder. We see my manage py at the root level, along with the README and my requirements txt with a git ignore and a .env. You also see my virtual environment. We've already talked about that stuff. The only new thing about this directory is that now I have my React project in there. And also, when I go into static, my static folder is completely empty. And we'll find out why here shortly after. So let's go further deep into our project. If I go into settings, we'll notice that settings has a load.env because we want to make sure we have the secret key, right? We also see that we're using OS. We have our installed app of user application. As we scroll down, we'll see that we're using PostgreSQL with a database name of task manager. We have our static files directory, which is telling us to use the root directory. So base directory, meaning the root directory, and to go into a folder called static. And then finally, the good stuff, we have this user auth model, and it's coming from the user app, and we named it app user. So we've seen this before. This was the same app user that we used last time. So here we have our app user. It's using an abstract user, taking an email that's also going to be his username, which we tell it here. We take in a name, and then we tell it that all of these fields are required fields. And then we pass our string method so that we could see it in our admin page. Okay, does anyone have any questions about this thus far? Both models and settings. I know. Yeah, of course.
So obviously we copied this down. We don't have the secret key. Can we just use one from a different Django project that we have? Does it matter what's in there?
Yes, you could use one from a different Django project that you already have opened. Otherwise, I could pass my secret key to all of you, and you could just put my secret key in there. Just please don't push it up to GitHub. I mean, it's not like anybody's gonna go in there.
It's the insecure one, right? The one we originally get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, just checking. I'm gonna do that now.
Okay. Yeah, of course, no problem. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, where do you originally get the secret key? Is that when you make the API call? Like they're supposed to provide you the key, then like a secret key?
Are you talking about the one from Django?
Yes, the Django one. Is I was trying to do that last time and I just wasn't able to like, do that secret key stuff, but like how do you do that entirely?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so we created this .env folder, which shows my secret key, so be it. We have this secret key. Then we have the equal sign, which assigns it to the following string. And that following string is what Django needs in order for me to run my project. When I go over to settings, I need to run this on line 14. I need to make sure that I have .env installed, well, python.env, and I need to import the load.env method. Yes, the load.env method. And then after that, I need to import OS so that I can actually go into my environment. I need to call the load.env, and that will allow me to actually be able to access my .env file as if it was a dictionary. So then here in secret key, we see that we use os.environ, and then I call the actual secret key there in square brackets, just the same way that we would call a key in a dictionary to grab the value. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's what I was missing. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Let's see. Okay, so we want to know this. Oh, that's really useful, Mason. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. Okay, awesome. So that takes care of this. And now let's go over and take a look at our views. So in our views, I actually changed everything from sign in and sign out to log in and log out. The other one that stays sign is user sign up. And you guys know that my reasoning for that is because I have a tendency of putting sing instead of login. But we have all the same things that we created earlier. I have no idea why we have CSRF exempt. I'm actually going to get rid of that because we don't need that. Hopefully my program didn't just completely shatter, but we'll see. So then I have all the necessary things that I need. Technically, I don't even need render or redirect. I do need JSON response, and I bring API view from Django REST frameworks. I have my authenticate, my login, and my logout from Django contrib.auth, and I'm also importing all of my models. Then I have the Django core serializers. So when it comes to Django, I know we're used to doing this, but this is actually not common practice. We don't want to import all. We want to make sure that we import only what we need. So let's take that off and let's just bring in our app user. The reasoning behind that is because if we continue to implicitly bring in different types of methods or models from different files, and then later on we start working with a library or something else that's inside of Django, and let's say that for some reason one of our names conflicts, if we just import it implicitly, we won't be able to see those two conflicting names. Now, by doing it explicitly, we could see if any of them actually do conflict, and if they do, we could always use the as to give it a sort of, oh, I forgot what the name was called.
Pseudonym.
Yes, an alias. There you go. A sort
Alias.
of alias. Thank you. All right. So now we go into our actual API. We see that this is supposed to take in a post request. In the body, it's expecting there to be an email, a password, and a name. And then we have these optional things where we have the super user and the staff being passed in. If it gets passed in, so if it is inside of the request.data, then it's going to set it to whatever is inside of request.data. Then after that, if we attempt to create our user, if it works, we save our user and return a true. If it doesn't, oh, hello. If it doesn't work, then we return a false. Now going into user login, same thing, it expects there to be an email and a password. It authenticates that user by email and password. And then after that, it asks, hey, is this user authenticated? So is the user authenticated and is it not none? Because if it can't find a user that matches these credentials, then it'll return us none. So once it finds that the user is authenticated and that he is active, meaning that we didn't tell him that he can't use our application, then we're going to try to log that user in and return a sign in is true. If this attempt fails, it returns false. And if this if statement fails, it's going to return false as well. Okay, so now let's move on to our API view for current user. And our current user, we're just basically grabbing the user that's already authenticated and that's inside of our program to return our user info. So if user info doesn't exist, they'll just return user, none. And let's just have that be common. So let's just do user. And lastly, we have our easiest view, which is sign out. And it's just going to log us out, right? So if it succeeds in logging us out, it'll return true. Otherwise, it'll return false. So that's great and all, but let's actually see it in action. So you'll see that I have these three different terminals. I'm going to go into the server terminal. Missing that decorator on line 58. Thank you so much. I wonder where it went. Must have run away. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and activate my virtual environment. And after I activate it, I can run my server. Okay, so now here's telling me that it's running at localhost 800. This one's 5173. Here's localhost 800. If I refresh it, we get this page telling us, hey, I'm not sure what you want me to do here because I'm not touching either of these. So this is important. And let's go to our URLs. So in our project URLs, we see that now we have this user endpoint, and it includes our application for the user app. When we go into our URLs for the user application, we see that we have the following endpoints: sign up, login, current user, and log out. So although this is returning a page not found, this is exactly what I expected Django to do. But all I care about is that Django is actually running at this point. So now let's check out Postman. And let's have Postman actually test out our API. So now when we go to Postman, we see that we have this login, but let's just try to sign up. And we could then check that that is the correct endpoint. So we have sign up. So localhost, user, sign up. When I go to my headers aren't supposed to have either a CSRF token. Oh, actually, it will have a CSRF token. So I'll have a CSRF token, nothing big. And as far as the body of my sign up, well, I know that I have an email and a password. I also wanted to have a name, and let me actually change this email to something that will be unique. Let's see. I know that he's going to be a super user and he's going to be part of the staff. Okay, so those are all the things that I need to actually be able to sign up for my application. So my local host is running, and let's send this request. Okay, CSRF token was incorrect. So maybe before we run this request, we run it to current user. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so it looks like I'm currently logged in, and that's the reason why my session didn't work correctly. So let me just fix that real quick. So if I go over to cookies, I'm going to make sure that my cookies correspond with my session headers. And as you can see, my CSRF token is not the same. So I'm going to grab that real quick. I'm going to grab my session ID. And I'm going to put that under authorization. And I'm going to send back both. So in this case, I want to log out. And I know this is supposed to be a post request. So let me just demonstrate what I'm actually doing here. So I'm going to the logout endpoint, which is then going to my logout function. And let me clean up some of this white noise as well. So it's going to go to my views of logout, take in the post request, and then sign out my user. So let's say I send this. Okay, it was successful. And if I look here, I see sign out is true, which is exactly what I expected to see in my body. Okay, great. So I was able to sign out. Now let's try to log in a new user. So sign up, not sing up. And now he's not going to have an authorization. And if I look at my cookies, my CSRF token stayed the same. So again, let's look at the body of the request. The body still has all of those things. I'm going to sign up. So let's send this, take a look at the body, and we see success is true, which means that I have created a new user.
Francisco, can I slow you down for a second?
Yeah, of course.
So I have never understood the CSRF token thing. Where did you get the CSRF token from?
Yeah. So for the CSRF token, once you have a Django project running, it will need a CSRF token to be accessed to you. And Django itself is already giving a CSRF token. It's just checking if any other type of request other than GET is not providing it. All right. So if I go over to, luckily I have an endpoint where I can run a GET request to. But even if I didn't want to run an endpoint to a GET request, as long as I go to my local host and I send this GET request, It's gonna tell me, hey, you have an error because there's nothing that's supposed to be filtered out here. But if I go over to cookies, we'll see them in the request. My cookies actually got back a CSRF token that Django provided for me. Does that answer your question, Mickey?
It does, and I'm playing with it now to see when it actually applies that. You're taking that and copying it to one of the headers. Is that correct?
Yeah, so now I'm taking the CSRF token, and in your headers, you need to label it as X-CSRF token. Once you label it as X-CSRF token, then you can paste it in here for its value.
What causes a token to change? Like, does it change every time you shut the server down and spin it back up, or?
So it actually runs on a timer. And there's a lot of like built-in backend Django stuff that we don't actually get to interact with or see. We can configure it so that we can ourselves alter how often it resets its CSRF token. But it resets on a time-based basis. So for example, last night I had a separate CSRF token than what I had here. And it took from last night until this morning for it to change. But if I just crash my server and I run another GET request, I'll still receive the same CSRF token. Awesome. Did that work out for you, Mickey?
Okay, does this have anything to do with the authentication?
Once we run into authorization, yes, it will have to do with the authentication.
Okay. So I can't tell if I previously had it or if it's sending it in. Okay, so now I'm getting the same one back. I think it was a little different from the one previous. So I went to log out. It still sent me back the same CSRF token.
Mm-hmm. So are you currently signed in?
I think so. I'm gonna try the log out. I want to delete the cookie off of Postman and see if I get it back on the first request. Because that's the concern, right? Your first request, you got to get this CSRF token somehow.
Yeah. If you're currently logged in, you're gonna
Oh,
need
it's
this.
still sending it back to me.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, you have to restart Postman to get rid of the cookie.
You want to share your screen so we can take a look at it?
Okay. Let me see.
Stop share.
So it's coming in and it's automatically adding it as a cookie.
Okay, so
I think-
that cookie is something different than our CSRF token. So if you go to use a current user,
So if I try to sign up again, which probably is, this should now give me a negative because it's
So
giving me
success
success
is
is
true.
true again.
so now go to
But
cookies.
our sign up doesn't check if it's already a user. I'm just now in there. It's a double user. So it's letting me sign up.
Yeah, so
Let's
now
see if
you
I
could
can-
click on cookies on the lower left-hand side.
Yeah.
And then what do you have there? Okay, so you have it as cookie. Could you place it as X-CSRF token instead of
I
cookie?
want to see if it'll let me log in as it is.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's a Postman thing, that it's adding the cookie every single time, I think.
Mhm.
So I don't think the browser is doing that. I think the browser, we have to add it to Axios.
Yes, we do. If you scroll down right there on headers.
So I got both. See, I got a different CSRF. That's reasonable. They changed the CSRF when I logged in. They're probably sending out, they had 2 set cookies, so that's coming in. Setting the user ID cookie.
You need a session, an authorization, and you need to put in the session ID in there.
Yeah. I'll play with it. I wanted to delete both of them and see if I ever got, if it would give me a CSRF token if I didn't send a CSRF token. I still haven't figured out how to delete the cookie. So just take out the value. Okay, so it's like, I think this is Postman's thing where it just makes it That was my previous problem, was getting it to actually give me a CSRF token. But yeah, Postman's not giving me that trouble, so I can stop
Okay,
the trouble.
awesome.
Still does
Let's-
not make any sense to me. So.
Okay, well, we could definitely talk after the lesson and see if we could figure
We
it
can
out.
see if it comes up when we're actually using the React app. I think that'll make a lot more sense.
Awesome. All right, so I totally forgot where I was at. Let me see. Did I log in? No, I haven't logged in. So let's go to log in. And when I go to log in, I want to make sure that in my body, I have my email and my password. I already created it, so I don't need the super or staff. I don't need the name. All I need is my email and my password. And this is supposed to be a post request. So let's send it and see what we get. Okay, so now I can go over to my headers, ensure that this is still correct. So we see that our CSRF token has now changed. So if I go in there and I grab it, I can then change it here. And then here in authorization, I want to include authorization, but that's where my session ID would come in. Okay, so now I have my session ID. This will allow me to send a post request. Let's check who the current user is. Again, this will be a get. I don't need anything in the body. We send this, comes back okay. And we see that my new user email is in there along with my username. Awesome. So now let's finally log out. It's a post request. I already changed all of my cookies and it comes back true. Okay, great. So now I have Postman working correctly and I know my actual API calls working. So here we see it. The only time that I got a forbidden was when I tried to sign up without the correct, send a post request without the correct CSRF token, and it gave me forbidden. Otherwise, it always returned at 200 response. Okay, great. So I know that's working correctly. And my API is now built out. Before I continue moving forward, because I don't want to move out of Django, I know you guys haven't seen Django in about a week and some change now. So I don't want to move out of Django without everyone feeling comfortable with what we have here. Does everyone understand how the user login API is working? Does anyone have any questions over how this user login API is working?
Francisco,
Mhm.
I can still get my current user information without having the CSRF token or the session ID on there.
Yes, if you're running a GET request, Django will allow it to happen without the proper credentials. But if you're running a POST request, that's where it will check for it.
Without checking who's calling in.
What do you mean
How
by
can
that?
it tell that I'm me if it doesn't have any type of credentials? Or is it looking at the cookie?
That is a good question. I will have to address that right after.
Well, that's the
this
downside. I can't tell
question.
if Postman's actually including the cookies or not. I didn't have to add it as a separate header.
Yeah, because I
But
noticed
that
that
could be because the cookie's already in there. Like I said, I think that's a difference from Axios. So I
yeah,
think it's still sending it. I wish you could see, like in the browser, you can see exactly what was in the request when it went out. I think that's the top. It must still be sending it. It's got to know that you're still in the same session ID and everything.
Yeah, because it's still sending the cookie and it's actually changing it for me. So more than likely it's in the headers of the request somewhere. But I think the session ID is the part that actually stops you from being able to send post request. Let me see if
What's a good post request to see if you're logged in?
Print request. I wonder when the request would be headers. I wonder if it's even possible. Let's see. Send it right here as well. And one more time for logout. Okay. So we get user null. Here's the headers portion. Yeah, WSGI. Okay, let me see what it says on the Django side. Okay, yeah, so here's the Django side. We see the CSRF token, and it's still sending the CSRF token itself. And there's even a Postman token that comes in with it. So let me see if I could send a post for a login. And then I'm gonna take off that authorization, bring back that email and password. So we see success is true. So here's my login. And it's still sending the CSRF token. Okay,
I
awesome.
wonder if it's tied to like Postman, the program running, so it's treating it like it's its own browser session. What happens
So-
if you close Postman and reopen it? Would it reset? Or would it
Postman-
generate a new CSRF token?
Postman isn't what's generating the CSRF token. It's grabbing it from the response that's coming back. So once it starts interacting with the browser and it gets a response, it grabs this X-CSRF token out of it so that it can access it.
So that means you'd have to shut down your server and restart your server to get a new CSRF token generated, right?
It goes on a timer basis, but yes, eventually it will start a new CSRF token. And actually, let's try to log out now. But in this log out, I'm not going to include my authorization. I'll just have the CSRF token. And I'm just going to go with the default CSRF token that we have here, because that one updated. Okay, so now if I send this post request, it shouldn't come back. Yep. So now it told me that the CSRF token is missing. And if I take a look at it, try to access logout, but it's telling me the CSRF token's missing. So now
Yeah,
what's-
I just saw the same thing. If you don't have a separate header, so it's not reading it from the cookie then.
yeah, so now if I add the X-CSRF token, it still tells me that it's forbidden. And if I add my session ID now, which I'm pretty sure it should be different now, so I need to update that. Yeah, so if I add my session ID now, and I put it in there, and then I send it, then it should come back. Oh, hello. Let's see, we have post, logout. What's the problem here? User logout, 403 forbidden. Okay. Let's see, we have my CSRF token needs to be updated as well. Okay. Now I send it. And there's my request. We see the Postman token, the CSRF token, and here's the session ID, which it uses to authenticate the user or who's sending the request. Awesome. That got a little bit into
Yeah.
into the depths of what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, I am still confused because on the GET request, I get my user, even if I haven't sent in the CSRF token or the session ID. So if that's what it's using to authenticate when you reconnect with the Django,
Right. So
why
if I-
doesn't it need that to retrieve that information?
Let's see. Log in. I deleted this. I don't think that changed. Say post request. Let me go into my body, email and password. Send it. Okay, so now if I go into headers and I take off my CSRF token, now I'm just sending something without any type of headers, right? And I just want to check my current user. This again will be a GET request. Don't need anything in the body. Don't have my email or password. I send it. Okay, it still returns the session ID of the user that's still logged in, and it returns the CSRF token. and it still gives me all my information, because as long as I run a GET request, I don't need that type of headers of authorization. But the moment I go into moving into a post or a put request, then it's going to need both the session ID and my CSRF token.
And how does the Django know who the user is?
It doesn't. Right now, it's just currently running, and it has, as it's running, it knows that there's somebody logged in. So in that, let me see. So in that GET request where I'm grabbing the current user, the user is already authenticated because I authenticated him in the login. I'm not asking Django to authenticate him again, and it doesn't need to authenticate him again because it's grabbing a GET request. So it knows that I'm not making any changes. I'm just asking for information. So then it just spits back the information. It doesn't know who it is. It's just giving the information as I ping the API.
I think maybe the issue here is you're getting sensitive information off of a GET request. So like the way the server is built, you shouldn't have to re-authenticate on a GET request, but also you probably shouldn't send sensitive information off of a GET request without authenticating it. So like it
Yeah.
looks confusing because you're getting your user information without re-authenticating, but that's just because as a, you know, you're choosing to pass that in that function when really that might just be an insecure way to write that.
Yeah, definitely. We could probably make it so that I need that authentication. There's some Django decorators that you could bring in where you could ask it to require authentication. And in that case, it will check for both the session ID and the CSRF token. But currently that's out of scope of this lesson. And I would be more than happy to go into that as a bonus lesson later on in this, in the program. But at this point, this is what we have to cover for the day. Does anybody have any other questions going on with Django?
So we've been querying the API and it looks like we signed up a new user. So if we were to query the SQL database, is that new user going to be reflected in the table?
Yeah, so let's check that out. So let's go into SQL, and I believe it's Task Manager. And let's run the relationships. So we see all these relationships, and there's our user. So now I can say select all from user app. I think that's it. And now we can see that we have two users. So the original user that I made when I was practicing last night, and then the user that we just created today. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so now we have our SQL set up, our server's running, and we check the API to work correctly. So now let's get into some React. Okay. Perfect, so we can collapse that and start looking into React. Currently, our router is empty, because later today, I want to go a little bit further in depth into what happens when you use HashRouter against BrowserRouter when you're working with a Django backend. And as far as our actual application, our application just has a logout button, a hello, a sign up form, a login form. And this is what they look like. They currently don't have any type of functionality. They're just empty forms. So let's run this real quick. We see the development come up, and I want to go into 5173. Now it's running. So they're running on two separate ports, and that's awesome to have them, but I want them both running on the same port, right? I want Django to be able to render this information for me so that it can share the same type of permissions, and I'll be able to sign in, log out, and do all that good stuff, all right? So now let's go into actually, well, before I move on there, does anyone have any questions about the React project thus far? Awesome. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, and I'm not using any bootstrap or anything like that. So let's start looking at some good stuff with React. So we're going to go into the vconfig, And in the vconfig, what I want to go into is talking about a little bit of what each portion of the vconfig does. So let's move over there and let me pull up my notes real quick so that I have it. All right. So we're in the vconfig. And currently, when I run the dev or when I run the build, let me show you guys. Currently, when I run the build, it creates this dist folder. And that dist folder is what's actually holding my index HTML along with all my CSS and my JS. So that's great, but that's not necessarily what I wanted to do, right? I don't want React itself to be rendering these files. I want Django to do it. And luckily, Vite knows that we're going to need to be able to plug this with some type of backend framework. So it gives us this vconfig.js to be able to mess with. So inside of this vconfig, it gives us the ability to give it a base. And in this base, we could just name it, I don't know, let's go with static, right? Because that's what we actually have out here. We have a static folder, and that's where I want it to go. After that, I need to specify where is it that my build is going. So when I run npm run build, what is it that I want it to do? Well, I want it to go into the out directory, meaning it's going outside of the directory. And it's going to go one back and fall inside of static. Once it goes one back and falls inside of static, I'm going to tell it to empty the directory. I'm going to make that true. And lastly, there's the source map key, which honestly, I don't know what this one does. So let's read about it and see what it does. And then we just need a comma to close our dictionary. And that's it. So again, this base is I'm telling it, hey, you're going to go look for a folder called static. And in this out directory, I'm telling it exactly where static is located. So it's going to go back, find static, and build itself upon static. Then it's going to empty the directory, meaning that everything that the build is creating is going straight into static. And source map is just going to give me capabilities to actually be able to see some React errors while I'm developing. Okay, so this is great. So now let's try to run the build now. Well, now if I run the build, we see that everything compiled inside of static. So now Django has access to this static folder that I can then utilize to be able to render my information. Does anyone have any questions over this vconfig before I move on?
Yeah, could you, it seems like it would be a one-line configuration thing to just to point Django to the dist folder as a static folder instead of going through all that config on the React side. Like when you're in Django settings, right? And you say base dir / static, why couldn't you just do base dir / dist? And then that's like the end of it. Would that work?
Are you talking about here? Or are you talking about in Django?
No, I'm talking about everything you just did right there in vconfig. You could have just let that alone. And then in settings, could you, instead of doing right there, instead of doing base dir / static, couldn't you just do base dir / dist? Would that still work?
So
Instead of having to change that whole.
Well, I'm actually inside of the folder. So
well, it's already base dir, so it should just be.
Oh, that's right. So
just change static to dist, right?
No, because dist is inside of client task. So I need to go inside client task first. Yeah. So
I see. Yeah.
So it's client task manager. And then you're saying change that to dist.
Yeah, well, I'm just curious if it'll work.
Yeah, we could try it and see what it does.
Instead of changing that whole vconfig thing. Yeah.
So let's look at our views and try to get this going then. Where is my... So my user app and what I wanted to do, or actually... Yeah, let's do inside the user app. Okay, so in the user app, I'm going to now create the path to be able to render that. And let's do views dot send the index. And let's name it index. All right, so this send the index doesn't exist. So let's go into our views and let's declare it. It's going to take in request. And then after that, this is where we're going to need to actually utilize that HTTP response. And I wonder, do I even have HTTP response? No, I don't. So let me bring that in. Okay, HTTP response. So it takes in the request. And once it has the request, I'm going to grab the index. So that's going to open. And here I'll have to map it the way that we have it. Do that too. I've done that one on a recent project. Yeah, so let's see. How do I get in there? So I would have to go back one, go into client, task, manager. And then after going to client task manager, I can then go into the dist folder and then grab the index.html. Okay, and then I can return the HTTP response of the index. Okay, so let's see if that works. Everything's already running on the build. Let's go here and let's go to user. Okay, so it's telling me it's not found because I'm trying to open this path.
Maybe it doesn't work then, huh?
Yeah. I think Chase said that he did it earlier on a recent project, but I'm not sure how he did it. Do you want to jump in here, Chase? Did you maybe just change your
Did you set it to user in your paths? I thought you set it to something else. In
No,
your
it's on the
URL.
user in the URLs. See, so it's on empty, right? But if I go into my URLs in my project, it's at user. And it's triggering the correct function. It's just not able to find it. And it looks like he just sent me a link. But honestly, this is a lot of mapping. So I think I'd rather keep it this direction. And in my views, instead of doing this, I can just tell it to go into static and grab the index.html. And I can change my base directory now. Where did you go? Ooh, well, it's already going into static files dirs and it's going in there. So maybe if I just grab the index itself. I'm just gonna try this real quick. Because now you guys made me curious. Okay.
No, I
It's
think
not
you're gonna
grabbing
have to
it.
change the settings
Yeah.
back.
Yes. So now we're gonna grab static. Then we could go back to settings, and then I'll do a recap over this because I know we messed around with it for a little bit. Let's go into static. And now when I rebuild it, okay, so now we see Django's rendering our actual files. Okay, awesome. So let me do a recap so that we understand what is going on here. We don't need this URLs. We do need this one. Okay, so in settings.py, I'm telling Django to look for my base directory at static, and it's looking for the static URL. So in this vconfig, I know that the static folder exists outside of my v project. So I'm going to tell it to look for the base directory of static. I'm going to tell it that it's going to be outside of this directory. So it's going to go back one and find static. And then it's going to empty itself out there and give me the capabilities to get React errors. Awesome. So that's what my vconfig does. Once that gets poured into static, I need a way to actually render it. So here we see the path of user. When we go into user URLs, at the empty path, we see that it's rendering send the index. So now when we click on views in send the index, it's going to open the static folder, grab index HTML, and then it's going to send it back as an HTTP response. So this is awesome. Now I can see this, but the only downside that I still have is that if I were to change something in Vite, for example, let's say, and let's close all this noise. We don't need to know my backend stuff currently. If I were to go to my source folder and open up app.jsx, and instead of hello, I want to say hello world, nothing's updating. All right, I can refresh this as much as I want, but nothing changed. My hello world is not reflecting. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new script to React, and I'm just going to call it the watcher or watch, which is what I like to call it. Some people call it the watcher. I just keep it at watch. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do v build -- watch. And what this is telling my program to do is to continuously build every time that a save happens on my React project. So now if I go to my client and I run npm watch, npm run watch, apologize. So now it compiles it, right? Create something new. And I can refresh my page. Now I see hello world. If I go back to app.jsx and I take off the hello, the world, nothing changes here. But if I refresh it, then Django recognizes the change. And now I can continuously develop while my watcher is running. And then all I need to do is refresh my page to see the changes. I'm gonna call it witness me. I'm not sure what you're referencing to. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions over the watcher and how we got V to compile inside of our static folder so that we could render it? Watcher is just to prevent running nom run build over and over. npm run build. Yes, so we're just running the watcher so that we don't have to manually type npm run build every single time we update something. Now I can just create the watcher, and every time I update something in my program, the build will automatically build over again. Does that answer your question, Will? Awesome.
So what's happening on your that port 51, whatever that was, the original Vite port? Like that server is not running anymore, right? So, okay.
Yes, that's correct. So now 5173 is not running anymore. Everything's running through port 8000 and everything's being rendered by Django. Awesome. So just a quick overview, we've capped on settings, the user model, views, URLs. We went over the React components that are inside of our project. And then we went into our base directory, out directory, everything that goes inside of the vconfig. We went over the watcher development. And now we are going to go over being able to connect this to our API. Do we have time?
Before we move on, your views, did you have to assign that open function to a variable and then return that? Or could you just return that open function?
You could just return that open function.
Okay.
All right. Can you show how you set the watcher? Okay, can you show how you set the watcher? Yeah, definitely. So for setting the watcher, I just went to my package.json. I don't need to install anything. I'm just going to give it this flag of telling it to watch. So in scripts, I have the watch command, so I can run npm run watch. And then the actual command, or what's going on behind the scenes, is it's running the Vite build. And by giving it the flag of -- watch, I'm telling it to continuously run this command every time there's a save on my file. So because I have auto save on, anytime I change anything on my project, it saves the file, which then causes a new build. Does that answer your question, Mickey?
Yes.
Awesome. Also, who watches the watcher? Yeah, no one. Yeah, okay, awesome. So it's 7:50. Nick's got something for you guys, so let's take a quick break right after Nick is over, and let's just go for a 10-minute break upon Nick completing his announcement. So you could take over now, Nick.
We don't need to record what I'm gonna do.
Perfect. All right, welcome back, everyone. So just recently, just to recap on what we've done, we've built the watcher in our project. We've also altered our vite config in order to compile our code or React code inside of our static directory outside of our vite project. And we tested our user application API, as well as gone over to render the index for our application. Awesome. Okay. So this is working so far. We have this, and now let's connect these forms over to our API so that we have some values changes. So there's this CSRFToken stuff, and let's go into the current user function first, because I can't remember. Actually, let me just ensure that I'm logged out here. Okay, so I am currently logged in, so let me log out. And of course, that's going to fail. So let's turn it into a get of current user. Let's send that. Take a look at the cookies. Headers, we need CSRFToken and our ID. So let's bring that back. Okay, so now we could send our post over to log out. Look, the body comes back true. Okay, perfect. So I am now logged out, and now I can continue moving forward with this portion. So let's go over to our components and let's work on our sign up page. So I want to sign up. We see here that I have the name, I have my email, and I have a password. I have no way of capturing these things. So I'm going to create a useState function for each one of them so that as I go ahead and type throughout my email or my name or et cetera, I can continuously update those values. So let's move on with that. Let's say const, and let's make it name, set name, and let's make that equal to useState, where it will be initialized as such. For the next one, we have email. We set email. And then lastly, we have password. Oh, thanks. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I'll continue forward for now. All right, so we have my name, my email, my password. We have these functions set, but they're not actually implementing my form. So now I'm going to go ahead and implement it into each one of my input fields by adding onChange functions into each one of them. So I'm going to say that onChange, it's going to take in an event. And what I'm going to trigger is I'm going to now set my name to event.target.value. And I'm actually going to give this input field a value of name. I'm going to do the same thing down here. Grab the value. I want to get my email, and on change, I want to pass in an event and set my email to event.target.value. And now I got my password. And again, I want an onChange. Gonna pass it my event And it's going to go to set password event dot target dot value. Okay, so this is great. So now we see that I have 3 input fields, each one of them with an individual placeholder, and each one of them with their own separate use state. So let's have a use effect that will console log all 3 of them. So let's bring use effect, and this is just to clarify that I'm actually capturing that information. I want my name, my email, and my password. And I'm going to pass all 3 of those variables as a dependency. Okay, so all of that built, I go to inspect. Okay, so we see that first message coming from signup.jsx. It's empty. That's because there's nothing there. If I go here and I go, Francisco, we see it typing as I'm typing along. Francisco at gmail.com. And then lastly, Francisco. Okay, so now we can see my name, my email, and my password. So I'm capturing all of that correctly. I know that I'm capturing it, I've confirmed it. So now I could actually go and create the function. So let's go over. I created this utilities file with JSX, and let me see if I have axios installed. So let me check my package.json. Okay, so currently in my package.json, I don't have axios in my dependencies, so I know I need to install axios. So let's bring that in. Go back to running the watcher. And now I can import axios from axios. And probably rent that in quotation marks. Okay, so now let's have const sign up. Let's make that equal to this variable. And actually what this is going to do is it's going to take in a name. It's going to take in a password. And it's also going to take in an email. This is also going to be an asynchronous function. And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and say let response be equal to await axios.post. And in this post, I'm going to specify the body. So I'm going to send it over to user. And then I'm going to send it to sign up. Sorry, so that's specifying the URL that I'm sending this to. And now I'm going to specify the body. So in this body, I know that I should have a key of name. It's going to name. I should have a key of email, which will then go to email. And I should have a key of password, which will then go to password. Okay, so now let's verify that my views was correct. So if I take a look at my views, this is going to my sign up. So I'm sending email, password, and name. I don't have to worry about these, and I don't want any of my applicants to be able to create themselves as super users. So once I have this, I can return response.data.success. Oh. And if I take a look at my views and response.data.success, I will either receive a true or a false, whether I was able to sign up or not sign up. Okay. And let's go ahead and export this function now. So now I have axios. And when I go to my sign up page now, I can now import that function from utilities. Now that function's included, my V build still happened correctly. There's no problems. So now let's go ahead and move into actually running a submit. And I guess we could have our function taking an event Well, let's say I just want multiple functions happening on this on submit. So on this on submit, I'm going to take in an event. And then I'm going to iterate through the following. So event dot event default. Oh, hello. And then the other function that I'm going to run will be sign up. And sign up will take in the name. It will take in an email. And it will take in the password. Okay. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions over what we've done thus far? Okay, just in case, I'm just going to go ahead and do a quick recap. So we have all these three input fields. All we did was we added a couple of use state functions to be able to track the input for each one of them. So I have a name, which tracks my name input field. I have email, which tracks my email input field. And then I have my password, which tracks my password input field. I have a utilities file where I specified where axios is located and what is going on with axios. So this function will take in the name, email, and password as arguments, and it will send them in the body of the request. Then after that, it will return the data of response.data.success. And let's actually have this. How do I do this? I'm going to console log response.data.success for now, so that we can actually see it. Okay. So now I go into my sign up page. And in my sign up page, if I go to refresh this, everything's going to clear up. So let's try this. Let's try to do fr@fr.com. And let's try to send that. Okay, so console log's true, and I was able to create a new user. Okay, great. So currently I have this going on, but I probably also want to empty my input fields, right? So let's add those functions in there. So let's set email to an empty string, set password to an empty string, and let's set name to an empty string. And this way we could visualize it a little better. Takes in an event. We prevent the form's default behavior. It runs the sign up function, and then it clears out our email field, our password field, and our name field. Okay, so now if I refresh, I have a new user. If I go to SQL and I finish this, run the same selection process, we see that now there's a third user with the Gmail of, or the email FR, and the name of FR. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions about how we connected this? Great. Let's
So just make sure I understand the concept. So basically you just have Django and React pulling from the same kind of information, right? You know, they have their own separate modules, obviously, but they're just kind of compiling and pulling from the same information. Django's, or was it React is? Yeah, mine's a little bit scattered just on the, I guess, how it's all connected. I know we added static and we had them both kind of reading from there on different ports, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so they're both actually on the same port now. So they're not on separate ports. So now when I run the build, it's going into static, and then Django is grabbing all the files inside of static and rendering it as HTML, right? So we're getting our React project, but we're not getting our React project from V itself. We're getting our React project from Django. So Django is what's actually rendering these files. So now since Django is rendering these files, Django also has all these URLs, right? And it's kind of like the Poke API, where I was able to ping the Poke API and get information back, right? Well, the same concept applies. It's just that it's now happening all within my project and my application. So this is my API that I created with my API endpoints. These are the views that I created that happened to that during that API. So now all I'm doing in utilities with React is I'm simply just pinging the API that I created. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, no problem. And I think I saw another hand go up. Was there anyone else?
I have a question if somebody else doesn't want to. So since you are using Django to serve up responses to the different URLs, does that mean you don't need to use a router anymore for URL stuff in React?
So you will need to use the router, right? Because with Django, Django is going to be handling your API, so your endpoints for the API, but it won't be handling the different routes that React is using. And we'll actually go a little bit further into that once we start going into React route, into a browser router against HashRouter, and how both of them can work for you. So if you could give me a couple of minutes, I will answer your question more in depth once we get there.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Okay. Anyone else? Awesome. Let's keep pushing then. So we were able to create a new user, but that user never logged in. So now let's work on our login form. So let's go over to, let's exit out of our sign up because that's already done. And let's go to login. So it looks like the same process is going to apply. So I want you guys to go ahead and navigate me through being able to create use state functions that will track the input of these files. And then we'll go over to utilities and create our function. Would you guys prefer me to call on somebody? Okay, so let's import use state. Okay, so now let's set the use state for each one of them. So now we got const name, or sorry, email, and then set email. And that's going to be equal to use state, empty string, and then const password, set password, and make that equal to use state of an empty string. Awesome. Okay, so need to update the states from within the input. So using the event.target. Awesome. So let's say, is that going what type of method is that going to be if it's using the event? Am I doing an on click or an on? Okay, awesome. So I get my on change. And you're saying to pass in the event and to update each one of them. So let's say email, or sorry, set email. And that's going to event.target.value. And same thing here. It's going to event. Let's set the password. And that's going to be event.target.value. Okay, so let's see what that does so far. Let's see if I do this and I start typing through it. Okay, everything's going well. Let's try to console log both of them. Okay, let's refresh it. Okay, that's working well. That's also working well. I can still back out. And I can also still back out. Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna go ahead and add the value variable and have that to email. And same thing here. That's password. Okay. Awesome. So now I have that going. And now that that's created, I'm gonna go ahead and create the utilities. Great. So we have this, that's sign up, but now we need a login. So let's export const login. So what's that supposed to look like? All right, so if we have this function right above here, how could we create this login function?
Would be kind of the same thing, except instead of posting, you're going to be getting the information from the database for the user.
Yeah, so let's say we have our URLs paths, right? And we want it to go to login. And let's see, we have the user.login. So let's see what type of method it's taken. So user.login is taking in a post request. Okay, awesome. So knowing that, what do we do here? So we have async. Okay. We have an async. What type of parameters is it going to take? I think it says pass in use state, so I'm assuming he means email and password. Okay.
Yeah, just the email password.
Awesome. What's this going to do?
Isn't it still going to be a post?
Yeah, so let's establish a response. And then axios.post. What URL am I posting to?
It's the login, right? Or no?
Yeah, so let's check a URL path. So we got login. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go user/login. Okay. What is the body of that request going to have? So let's take a look at the view. So yeah, the request is expecting email and password. Okay, so now that I have that, I can probably console.log my response. I believe we have a success here, but let's just check. Okay, so we actually have a sign in. And to avoid any problems, let's switch that over to login. Okay, so now we go here to our utilities, and instead of success, we want login. And we'll return that as well. Okay, so now we created this function and it's being exported. Yeah, I get what you mean, Dave.
Could you zoom in like once on the code, just like the
Yeah, of
visual?
course. Does that
That's
work?
good. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, no problem at all.
my eyes were like going in like what?
Yeah, I'm so sorry, everyone. Okay, so now that we have this, right, what's the next portion? So currently we created this, but we haven't plugged it into our form. So how do I plug it in here?
Isn't that on submit? Or something with a button, forgot. On some, a form on submit, that's right.
Yeah, so let's take an on submit. That's gonna create an event. And what do we want this event to do? We want a couple of functions to happen upon this submission. So what do we want it to do? If I submit a form, what's the default action of a form? Oh, so got it. Prevent.default first. So let's do prevent.default. Okay. So now I have that one. What's next?
I forgot the name, but. Yeah, I forgot
Yeah.
the name of the thing you just made.
Right.
Login.
Okay, so now we bring in login from utilities and we need to pass it in our password and our email. Okay, and then we want these to get emptied out again. So how do we empty them out upon submission? On line 25, can you change the value of login instead of sign up?
26 now.
Line 25, oh, line 26 now. Value, oh, yes, I can. Okay, awesome, thank you. Okay, awesome. So now how do I reset these back to an empty string?
Use state or set
Yeah.
state.
So I go set email back to an empty string, and then I say set password back to an empty string. Okay, so that should work. Let's see what we get here. So we have our promise, we're handling it. Let's try and see what we get. So let's have fr@fr.com and fr. Okay, so we sent it. Oh, probably should refresh the page. I apologize. fr.fr.com and fr. Okay, so we see a true, and now I'm signed in, but I currently don't know who the user is. So now we have to create a user function. And let's just go straight into the Axios portion of this. So let's get our current user. I'm not getting any updates on my React route. Was there something we have to do to start the watcher? npm run watch will start the watcher. And then you should just see this continuously happen. Yeah, of course. Okay, so now we have this current user function, and we wanted to interact with our URLs. We wanted to grab our current, we wanted to send, interact with the endpoint of current user. And current user is then taking in a GET request and sending back the actual current user. So what do I need to do here? Yeah, so it's going to set another Axios request. So let's turn it into an async function. In this case, if we look at our views, what type of request is current user taking?
Get.
Yeah, so we just want to get request. So let's go into our utilities, create our function. All right, and let's say let response. That's going to equal await axios.get. Okay, so I know user is my default endpoint, but what about the rest? What endpoint is it that I want to touch?
Is it current user?
So let's go over to current user. Oh, and I could spell current user. And I don't think this one's going to need a body, right? Do we need to send any type of body here?
Didn't you just have to return the response?
Yeah, perfect. So the response will just come back, and that's all I really need, right? So let's do this, and then let response equals await. Okay, so let's console.log response.data. And earlier you guys mentioned that we really don't want to return everything that we're getting, so we might have to clean up our API a little bit. So we have this current user function, and I want it to run every time that the app renders, or to run in some sort of use effect, right? So let's go into our login function. And well, actually, let's go into our app.jsx. So let's go app.jsx, and let's try to bring that in. So we want a use effect. And this use effect is then, did not import use effect. Okay, this import is then going to call current user. Doesn't mean anything. But current user is asynchronous. So because current user is asynchronous, we're going to need to call it from within an asynchronous function. And now we can call the get current user function from within. And let's await. Get current user. Okay, great. So now we see this. If I refresh, okay, so now I have a user object. And that user object came back with an email, some fields, my PK. But maybe all I want is fields to be returned. So maybe we should clean that up a bit. Let's see, let's go back to our views. And let's only return fields. Do you know about the Alt up and down arrow shortcut for moving a line of code up and down? I did not. Yeah, thank you. I will have to try that one out here soon. All right. So now instead of just returning index.0, I probably want to, I don't even need this entire user thing. I could just return. Yeah, I could just return the user itself. So let's return. Let's go with user. No. User info workable. And inside user info workable, I just want to grab fields. Okay, so I go to refresh this. Now I get an uncaught server error, failed with status 500. So that's my fault if it's a 500. Fields list indices must be integers. Okay, so must be a 0. Go to refresh. Perfect. So now I just get my email and my name. And I think I still have this current request going on. Okay, perfect. So now that I have my 0 and my name, the last thing to do is actually show myself that I'm logged in. So let's go back to my app.jsx and let's create a user. So const user set user. And I'm going to make that equal to a use state. Then I'm going to initialize as null. And here I'm going to actually set user this. So now I could have a separate use effect. But I don't need that because technically that console.log is coming from my current user function. And let's take a look at my utilities to ensure that's working correctly. Okay, returns response.data. Perfect. So now here, where it says hello, I can try putting in some JavaScript. I can say user, and I can say and, because currently the user is null. So if it doesn't exist, it's not going to do anything. But if the user does exist, then I want it to return my user.email. So I can refresh this, and now we see hello, Francisco at francisco.com. Or even better, if I don't want to do the email, well, my user has a name, so I could do a name and refresh this. And I see hello, FR, because that's my current user, email, and name. Awesome. This is all working really well. Let's say that I want to go ahead and log out now. Or actually, before I even continue moving forward, because we just covered a lot. Does anyone have any questions over this get current user function, the sign up or the login, or all of it put together? I want to make sure I didn't lose anybody. And if I did lose you, please let me know so that we could clarify. Okay, awesome. So silence. Just a real quick recap, just in case. We're going to go ahead and go into the utilities. And utilities, we created this current user function, which runs a GET request to user, current user. And here we see that the current user is being triggered. If we go into our views and we see current user, we see that it takes in a GET request, and it doesn't expect there to be a body at all. It's just grabbing the request, grabbing the user that's currently logged in, and then returning that information. So now in utilities, all I need to send is a GET request. I don't need a body, so all I specify is the URL. I'm console.logging the response.data, and I'm also returning the response.data. In my app.jsx, I have this use state that I set to null, so that if this is null, it won't show anything. So I'm asking, is user null? If it's not null, meaning that something does exist, then I want you to show user.name. If it is null, just don't show anything. And then I have my important current user function inside this use effect that will happen every time my page renders in case a user is currently logged in. Okay, awesome. Let's keep pushing. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're still pretty good on time. All right, so now that I have this user function and I'm able to log in, well, now I want to be able to log out. So let's see. How can I log out? Let's grab our logout. And in URLs, I'm sending a logout. And in my views, looks like I'm sending a post request to log out. So let's go create that utility. How do I create a logout function? And then I'll have you guys navigate me through it. And then from there, we'll take off. Okay, so we want to export cons logout, make that into an async function. It's going to be an arrow function. Okay. So we have our logout. Nice. So we have let response. And then we want await axios.post. And this is going to go to the response to the logout URL. So let's confirm that. So it's going to log out. Perfect. doesn't need a body, it just needs to send the log out. So now what do we do? Now we could just console log it. And we could just return response.data.success, I think. Let's take a look at our views and see what we have for logout. Oh, we have sign out, and let's change that to logout. All right. So now that all of that is built, this function is working, but I need to actually call it somewhere. So I see they have this logout button, and that's in app.jsx. Oh, that's app py. Hello. So now we go to app.jsx. Here's the button that says logout. How do I add this logout function that we just created to that button? Okay, so we're going to use an onClick. And that onClick will then call the function, which we named logout. We see that it was imported from utilities. So now we have logout. Okay, great. So now we refresh this. If I click logout, it gives me a 403 forbidden. And this is going back into the whole X-CSRFToken and session ID. Well, now that I'm logged in, it actually needs me to have some sort of session ID whenever I send a post request. It let me get my GET request to grab my current user, but it didn't allow me to send a post request. So let's take a look at Django. Let's go to Django, X-CSRFToken, and let's run JavaScript right after that. So here we have how to use Django, X-CSRFToken. It gives us a function. Okay, so we could just grab this function and actually set it into our token. So let's create a new component. Let's call it X-CSRFToken.jsx. And let's import that. Oh, hello. I want to make sure this gets exported. We're sending this information. Okay, this isn't working for some reason. And it calls all of this, right? So now we're getting our X-CSRF token, but we're not giving it to Axios. So let's say I want to give it to Axios. Well, I just need to import Axios. And once I import Axios, well, then I could just give it to its headers. And it tells you on our notes, we have a way to access headers. And what we want to do is we want to say axios.defaults.headers.common. And then we want to go into X-CSRFToken. And this is going to equal X-CSRFToken. So now we save this. It looks nice and clean. This is all happening. It's not returning anything, but this is a function that I need to actually be able to call. So now we can go back to app.jsx. And at the very top of our application, in the first line right before use effect, we can now import that. So let's go X-CSRF token. It seems to fail to recognize it. Export get. Oh, it's get token. So let's go with get token. And we call it as normal JavaScript in that case. So now that we have that, we can come back over to our Beep project. Let's clear the console, refresh it. Nothing's happened yet. Well, now I can log out. And because I log out, I can see response.data and I see that logout is true. But this didn't update because my get current user function never triggered again. So maybe I need to send that again, right? So let's see what we can do here. How can I specify this? Okay. So here, we'll make the dependency. Well, here the dependency can't be user, right? Because we're setting something to user. But we know that if logout is successful, then we need to be able to set this to null, right? So let's see what we can do here. Let's go to our views. It's returning true or false. Okay, and now if we go to our utilities, we're returning .logout. So this console.log is not showing me what I'm actually returning. Okay, and in my app.jsx, I can say, so on click, log out, and maybe I could have a separate use state. And let's do set new user. Let's make that equal to a Boolean variable, use state, and let's have it equal to false. And let's also track new user in here. You're not able to set user to null. So I can't set new user to null from my views. I mean, from my utilities file, right? So because I don't have access to it, I could pass it as an argument and then try to set it that way, and try to return that, but we would end up with the same problem. So instead, what I want to do is I want to trigger my use effect to happen every single time there's a new user. So upon logout, I can then pass the new user to logout. So I can say set new user is going into logout, go into utilities, go into logout, and I can say set new user. And now I can set new user to not new user. So I also need to pass new user in here. And let me close down my views real quick. Go into app. Okay, and then I need to do the same thing when I log in. So let's go take a look into our login form and pass that as a dependency. So let's go into, would onClick, logout, and set user null work, since logout returns true or false? Yeah, we could try that. Let's see. And let me just erase what I just did here. And here as well. Okay, so currently this isn't running, or it is running. Error, minified reactor. Oh, I broke something. Let's see, X-CSRFToken. Must be because of this. Okay, so it's not that. Let me try to get it back to its original working state. I want to sign up. Nothing changed here. Log in, nothing changed here. And let's see what's going on. Too many re-renders reach the limit. Okay, so then that's happening upon the use effect. Well, the use effect is empty. And there is no other use effect. So let's try doing this. I'm going to kill it. But this is working. But if I go back to the original, okay, everything's working. Awesome. Just needed a little bit of love. Okay. So what we're trying to do was do the and here, right? So and set user to null. So let's refresh this. Okay, that and send user to null is what's breaking it. Yep. So that part didn't work. Let's see. So on click, log out. Yeah, we could just pass in the set user in here. So set user, and inside of my utilities, here I can say set user null. Okay, I can refresh it. Everything's going well. Not sure where this true is coming from, but there's a true coming back. Oh, I know where it's coming from. App.jsx. Here you go. Okay, perfect. So let's try signing in real quick. F4, f4.com, F4, and upon login. So login came back true, but that also didn't work the way we wanted it to. So let's pass in the user to login. Okay, so gets passed into login. Now we go into login. We need to grab set user. And this would be a good place to use context. So we have all of this. We have our on submit. And we have our login. Or login wouldn't return that information, actually. So for now, let's just do the refresh so that we can see it. And then afterwards, I will try to figure out a way to connect them all. So let's go into utilities, login, window.location, old school JavaScript. Okay, so if I refresh, we go here, click logout, sets it to null, go fr at f4.com, fr, go to login, runs a refresh, sends my GET request, and says hello fr. Not if you're trying to write a test for it. Would onClick logout work since logout returns true? Okay, perfect. So that was a lot of debugging. So I'll go into this real quick without the debugging. So we got our CSRF token. Once we got our CSRF token, everything was working correctly, but we weren't having the exact behavior that we wanted. Logout was actually logging us out, but it wasn't reflecting here. So all we did was we passed a set state into the logout function. And by passing the set state into the logout function in our utilities file, we were then able to set the user into null when the user logged out. So here would be a good place to have an if statement. So if response.data.logout. So if this is true, which it should be if it works correctly, then you said old, nice. Thank you, whoever shared that. I think that was Dave. Yeah, so if it works correctly, then it will set the user to null. And it will still return the data. I don't really need it to return it, but we'll just return it for now. And now let's go back into the app. Okay, so when login happened, we have login happening. It wasn't reflecting correctly. So now we run this reload. And by running this reload, we're having app.jsx actually trigger our get current user, and it gets our new user. So I go to refresh. Currently the user is null. I can sign up. Okay, so now we see that true, which means it worked correctly. So now let's go fa.fa.com. Now we sign in, we get that window reload. So it reloaded, and now we see the new user because that triggered the use effect. And if I go to log out, it just simply turns the user back to null because the response was true. And if I refresh the page, now we see that the user dictionary is null. Great. Does anyone have any questions?
Would this app right now handle multiple logged in users, or is it just a single user app?
Currently, while it's in your local host, it will only be able to handle one user. But once you actually go and deploy this site and it's an online server, it can handle multiple users. And that just has to do with the fact that when you're running it on localhost, you're only receiving one. There's something that your browser sends back to your server, telling it where the request is coming from. So since all the requests are coming from your one localhost, it's only able to handle one user login. Whereas if you had different browsers making those requests to your server, then they could handle multiple users. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay.
Awesome. Any other questions?
When you log out, and it sets your user to null, does it do anything to the cookies and stuff like in your CSRF token?
It does, yes. So let's try to, let's see, I do have my headers open. So let's run a GET request real quick so that we can see it. So when I refresh the page, this is what happens upon GET. Right, so upon GET, I have all these different, let me close this up a little bit. Okay, so upon GET, I have my, so it tells me the host, where it's localhost, tells me the connection, where it's keeping alive, what the browser is, it's Google Chrome. But down here, it starts, so there's the CSRF token, the way we see it. And notice that there's no session ID, right? It's just running the CSRF token, and that's it. So now if I go to actually log in, and I send it, well, now we get another GET request. So first we receive that post to log in, and that post to log in still only had the X-CSRF token, right? Didn't have the session ID just yet. Let me see if I could find it. Yeah, so there's this, there's the X-CSRF token. But now on my new GET request, not only do I have my X-CSRF token, but I also have a session ID right here at the bottom. And this session ID is what belongs to the individual user that's signed in. Now, when I click on logout, so the post request comes through. The session ID came through because that's who I'm logging out. So now it logged down this session, logged out the session ID. It switched my CSRF token. And now if I refresh it, we see that the session ID is gone. because it was just logged out in the prior request. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Please show the get cookie function, the one from Django or the one that we're currently using. This is what you wanted to see, Mickey? Okay. So the session ID is randomly generated, but stays with the user as long as they are logged in and logged out. What generates the session ID? So upon logging in, that's what generates the session ID. Once you're logged in, a session ID is generated to keep track of the user that's currently logged in. Oh, is this Jose? What's up, Jose?
Yeah, I was just curious. So, but what actually generates that session ID? Is it based on the CSRF token, or is it just some kind of random or pseudo-random string that's generated upon user creation?
Yeah, so that's going to be something that comes from the abstract user. I'm assuming it comes in the abstract user model once it actually gets created. Let me check.
Okay, we don't have to find it. I just didn't know if it was something hashed or if it was from a model or something. I can definitely Google philosophy. I was just curious if it was something we explicitly defined or had to import.
No, neither of the above. We don't have to import it nor explicitly define it. Django handles it for us. As far as where it handles it for us, I'm assuming it may be under authenticate. Let me check. Yeah, generated by the other. Okay, so let's see. I have authenticate here. So it looks like it looks for some sort of signature. Or maybe in the login function, actually. There you go. So it's the
Perfect,
login
thank you.
function that's creating it for us. And it looks like it does a full flush and it does hash it. So it's a hashed session cookie that gets session ID that gets sent back to us that we use.
Okay, so if the same user logged in, logged out, so session cookies white, and then logs back in, is it a different session key or would it be the same session key?
It would create a new one.
All right, completely different.
Yes.
So if we
Got
wanted to track them, we would have to create and push a cookie to them that would live in the browser that we would then check next time they log in against our database.
You can check the individual user activity. And I think you could do it. There's a couple of built-in functions that come in with the login. So that you can actually keep track of the user every time he logs in. But I don't remember them off the top of my head, if I'm being 100% honest. Let me see. Tracking daily user data in Django. Okay, so it takes the project requirements, creating the application. User model, here's the text field. Okay. Okay, so that saves it. It didn't go at all into tracking the user. That was, oh, you can inspect its visits. Yeah, I'll have to figure this out and then get back to everyone on how to actually track the user. If you're desiring to track the user activity, I'm sure there's a way to do it. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Awesome. Is there any other questions? It's login without that line, nothing happens. It's not needed unless you add a session authentication. Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Mickey. Awesome. So we've been trucking for quite a while. It's already 11:16. Let's take yeah, let's take a 15-minute break and then come back to actually continue working or developing this application. I will see you all in 15 minutes. And I'll stick around in case anyone has any questions. All right, hopefully everyone's coming back right about now. I know we still have a couple minutes though. Trying to collapse everything. All right, let's go into React Router. It's still 9:29. Was that enough time to get that sandwich in? Yeah. Nice.
Oh yeah, I don't mess around with sandwiches. That's serious business.
Yeah, your whole station already set up in the kitchen or what? I think you're muted, Dan, if you're talking. Yeah.
It's like a sandwich making assembly line counter. Crank them out.
Nice. All right, let's start working to some React Router stuff. And I think everyone should be back by now. So let's continue the recording so that we don't run too short on time. I never stopped the recording. Of course I didn't. So I apologize, everyone. There's going to be a good solid 15 minutes of recording in there. So I'll see if I could try to trim it out. But in the meantime, let's continue moving forward with this. So we got HashRouter and BrowserRouter. So the main difference between HashRouter and BrowserRouter is that HashRouter, when you're creating your routes, they won't ever interfere with the routes that you're doing with Django. They'll work independently. Whereas if you're using BrowserRouter, it will actually ping these routes and try to create that logic if necessary. So let's go into this, right? Let's try to create a browser router for first. So let's do const router. And let's make that equal to create browser router. Then we have our dictionary. And actually for create browser router, we may need a little bit of guidance here. Let's see, go. Okay, so for create browser router, we open it up, we have our path. Right, so the first thing that we need in our path is, oh, and actually I want this in a list, not just a dictionary. Okay, so in our path, I want to specify this is going to be at the index. And then I want to specify the element, right? So let's do element, and let's make that the app. Put a comma there, and we probably want to import our app. Okay, so now we have our app. Now the next thing that I want to do is I'm not going to have an error element for time purposes, and let's actually have some children. And again, this is going to be an array of objects. And here, let's have index be true. And let's say that the first thing I want them to see is my sign up page. So let's do my element and let's turn this into sign up. So let's scroll up so that we can actually visualize it. So let's take sign up. And for a loader. Well, this one doesn't have a loader, so let's move on to the next one. So in the next one, what I want to be able to see is, let's specify a path. And in this path, I wanted to say log in. And the element that I want to render is my login. And yep. Okay, and this one also doesn't have a loader. And probably want a comma there for separating between these objects. Okay, awesome. So now I have these things, and we're probably going to need a navbar as well. So let's create a new file where we have a navbar.jsx. Let's create that. So export const navbar and make that equal to. Okay, and then from here, what we want this navbar to be, we just want it to be a division. So return div, and this div is going to have an h1 of auth. It's going to have a link to slash for sign up. And it's going to have a link to log in. And that's going to be for login. Okay, so that's returning that. Let's check the endpoints. Endpoints do not match. So let's do login. And now inside of our main CSS, we want to change this so that it looks more like router provider. So let's go in there and let's change that real quick. So we want, oh, I didn't export my router, did I? No, I did not. So export router. And let's do default. So that takes care of that. And here I want router provider, where the router is router. And currently I'm grabbing the router from React Router DOM. That's not the one I want. I want to import my router from .router. Okay, so now I have this. Let's see if everything's building correctly. So it's not building correctly, and that's because in my router, I'm telling it to grab an app like this, when it needs to grab an app as such. Okay, so now everything built correctly. If I go to refresh it, I get unexpected 404 not found. Okay, so this is where the browser comes in. So it's saying, hey, this route doesn't exist. All right, there's no such thing as user. Okay, so now if I go and I add user here, and create the slash, and same thing here, I go to user, and I have the slash. Well, if I refresh it, then it's able to find it, because now it knows there is such a thing as the user endpoint, and it knows that it's supposed to actually render these functions, right? So now if I just simply change this from create browser to HashRouter, and then I refresh it, well, now I get this again. It's telling me, hey, this doesn't exist. And if I go to take this paths off, well, now it does exist, right? And I don't think I'm calling this correctly here. So let me put in my outlet. Okay, this is fine. Let's comment that one out. And let's comment that out. Okay. All right, perfect. So now it's able to compile correctly. We see sign up. And if I go to login, Now it turns into login, but we see this little hash right here. So that's the main difference between HashRouter and BrowserRouter. So BrowserRouter will actually interact with your backend routes, meaning that it's going to check that your backend routes are not correlating with whatever it is you're trying to run in your React project. All right. Whereas in HashRouter, instead of interacting with your server, it's going to create a hash and then create the following route that you specified. And this way it won't run into any problems with what you're trying to do with your BrowserRouter. And everything still works the same here. So I could still do fa.com and then do fa. I do the login. Okay, logs me in. I could go back to the sign up page. I could still log out and it will still log me out. None of my functionality was hurt. Everything's still working correctly. But now if I go over here back to my router and I turn this back to BrowserRouter, I'm going to have to specify the user. Because now it's not only checking this first endpoint, it's creating following endpoints to follow. So let's take off that. Okay, so now this is working. And if I go to login, we see how now login looks like this. Well, it's telling me that there's nothing there. And if I try to switch it this way, it's going to tell me this doesn't exist, bro. So now I go to login, it tells me, hey, this page wasn't found. And that's more than likely because of my navigation. So let's go to navbar. And now I have to specify user so that it's able to actually go there. I refresh it. Okay, so now it goes to user and then login. All right, so there's the difference between HashRouter and BrowserRouter. Again, HashRouter will create its routes from React separately from your routes from Django, whereas in BrowserRouter will first try to touch your routes from Django. Then if everything fails in Django, it'll come back and try to access whatever you have in React. And that's pretty much the gist of it between BrowserRouter and HashRouter. As far as which one's better to use, see, so now that one didn't fail because it needs to go to user. Okay, so I go to user, go to login. Okay, perfect. Now it's working. Yeah, as far as which one's better to use, it's honestly your personal preference. Most people say that it's better to use BrowserRouter because you have the ability to be able to run a GET request at the same time you're loading. But now that's no longer an issue because with the new way that we create routes, we could just use loader functions to be able to load whatever information we need for our specific page. So I don't see an issue with HashRouter. I'm sure Ben might have a better opinion on it, but from what I've gathered up to this point is that it's honestly up to you as far as preference goes. And it doesn't change anything when it comes to efficiency with your program. I would argue that HashRouter is technically faster than BrowserRouter because it's not touching your backend. It strictly knows that it's doing its own routes to not touch your backend. But again, that's just user preference. So use whichever one you feel like might be best. There's really no other difference other than that one fact. BrowserRouter touches your server, whereas HashRouter does not. Just in case I didn't say it enough, again, BrowserRouter touches your server and HashRouter does not. Okay.
And because BrowserRouter is touching the servers, it's sort of like those paths that you're defining in router.jsx, they're conflicting with the paths that you've defined in urls.py. Is that sort of?
Yeah, so that's the problem that I get from it, right? So for example, we have this login, and if I go over to my views, well, login takes a, let me see, where's login at? So login takes a post request, right? And we're trying to send a GET request to it. So let's see what the server does when we go to login. So I go to login, and we see that it's, see how if we click refresh, it like shuts down, tells me, hey, there's no such thing here. Because you're already a login and it's looking to send a post, it's looking for a post request. So this isn't working. And that's why it's giving me a 404 error. All right. Although this route does exist, it doesn't know what to do with it. And let me just make sure the route does exist. Where is my route? So we have a regular login. And then if I go to router, you see how now there's a capital I? So it's looking for log in with a capital I. And let me see if I could zoom in there. I'm not sure if you guys could see that very well. Yeah, so it's looking for log in with a capital I. But the only route that I've defined is log in with a lowercase I. So let's say I change that up, right? And not only do I have to change it there, but I have to change it in my navbar. Okay, so let's say I change that up. And now I refresh it. Go back to the user, everything shows up well. Okay, well now I go to login. Login shows up. And if I refresh it, well now I get a 404. And I get this 404 because I'm trying to send a GET request to user login, but it's interacting with Django REST frameworks. And Django REST frameworks is telling my route now, hey, this route specifically can't take a GET request. It can only accept a POST request, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and you have to figure out a way to kind of finesse it so that your routes can cooperate with BrowserRouter. Whereas if I use HashRouter now, and I need to go to my navbar actually, and I need to erase all this. So now let's see, this is compiling. Okay. Back to the user. Unexpected error. Why are you giving me an unexpected error?
Your router. Yeah. You need the one off of login too on the router.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so now that I'm here, now I can go to login and it's not interacting at all with what's going on in my urls.py. Right? It's not trying to talk to it. It knows that because there's that hashtag right there in the middle of it, or the ampersand there, it's not going to try to do anything. I could refresh this all I want. None of my functionality is hurt. I could go back to sign up, refresh this all I want. Nothing changes. Right? Because it's not actually touching the URL patterns that I established in Django. It's just treating all of my URL patterns in my router as a completely separate entity than the ones that I have in Django. Does that answer your question? I think that was Drew.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, no problem at all. Okay. It's 9:46. So in the interest of time, let's see. Let's try to, I would like to get this utilities file working the way I want it to where as soon as somebody logs in, this gets updated. So let's do that real quick. Ooh. All right, so now that we have it this way, there's a couple of things that we're going to need to change. So let's go over to app.jsx. We have all this information. We need to figure out a way to get this set user over to my original, my login page. So let's do, let's see, let's say export const, and this is going to be user context, and it's going to equal context provider.
I think it's create context.
Oh, thank you. Great context. Okay, and I think Mickey, you mentioned something about setting it to an empty string for testing purposes. So I may have to explore that a little bit as well. Okay, so now we have our create context, and now here I can now provide that. So let's say user context dot divider, and where the value and the values that I'm going to pass is user and set user. What takes the entire line if I do it that way? Okay. Okay, I know I'm not going to need that anymore, and I know I'm not going to need this anymore. Okay, so now I pass it, it goes into login, and when login gets set, I want to grab that stuff. So let's do const user, and that's going to be equal to use context. And I want to grab that use context from user context. And then const set user. Same thing, I want to grab that from use context, add to user context. So now that I have that information, I can then pass it as an argument to login. Okay, so now set user, and honestly, that's the only one I need. I shouldn't need user. Okay, so that's going to go into the login. Now I can go take a look at my utilities. Login, grab the set user. Okay, and let's go into my views. Sorry that I'm kind of taking off. I'm trying to get this done before you guys' lunch break. So let's see, we go into login, takes in the email, takes in the password, authenticates, logs us in, request.user. But then, okay, so do have the user. So I wonder what the user looks like upon authentication. And let's go into the server. Okay, I need to take off this request. Sure, I don't have it anywhere else. Oh, and it's currently doing a reload, so I need to take that off too. Okay, so let me just log out real quick. And that logout also has that print, apparently. So let's get rid of that. And let's go fa at fa.com, fa. Okay, so I log in. So it looks like this is what the user, no, that's not it. Here it is. So when I tell it to print the user, it's actually returning the dunder method. So that's great. So maybe in my return, I could just return the email. And so let's go back to views. Go ahead.
No, sorry.
Oh, no problem at all. Let's go with email and make that user the email. Hopefully that works. And then let's do name. And that should be user.name. And let me just check my models to ensure that's what I call them. So email and name, perfect. So now let me log out. Everything's working well. Okay, so it's returning undefined, and it's not actually returning undefined. It's what I'm console logging here. I just want to do .data. Log out. Okay, so it's returning it correctly and it's console logging it, and I already have the set user. So I could just set user to my response.data. Set user to response.data. Okay. So I go to log out and this should work. And it works. So now I have it available as the user. So just to recap, the real quick changes that I made was, and let's start off from the front end and move on to the back end. Close my models, we'll need that, we'll need app.jsx, don't need the navbar. Okay, perfect. So to start from the top, I created a use context. Inside this use context, I then gave it the value of our user, where I passed in the user and the site user, and I passed it through my outlet. So now when I go into my login, I grab the set user out of my use context, and then I pass that set user function into my login. So now I go into utilities. In login, I grab the set user function. I wait for my response, which now my response is returning a dictionary of the email and name of the user that's currently being, that just signed in. And once that's returning, well, all I'm doing is setting the user to that dictionary, meaning that it's no longer null. And I technically don't need to return this anymore, so I can just get rid of that. Perfect. And same thing here. I don't need to return that because it's already grabbing the site user. Okay, so now if I go to log out, sets it null. If I go to log in, well, now it receives a dictionary of the email and name. So it sets name, it sets that to the user, and we get the display of name because now the user is no longer known. Awesome. Does anyone have any questions over anything that we went over today? We still got 5 minutes to kill. So if there's any questions or any confusion, I know there was a lot covered today and there was a bit of debugging at the same time that we were working through it. So please let me know if there's any type of confusion over anything that we went over. And I do want to make it, oh, go ahead.
So I have a question about the hash router thing. So I see that it, it doesn't touch the backend. Okay, fine. But what's the downside?
I don't
I mean,
know.
why would you ever use BrowserRouter then,
Oh, why choose browser router over HashRouter? React router. When we have a small client-side application which doesn't need backend, we can use HashRouter because when we use hashes in the URL location bar browser, it doesn't make a server request. So I guess that's the downside, that it's not making a server request, and you would have to handle it with independent logic. Whereas if
so
you're
you
using
basically have to do
BrowserRouter,
all the routing on the front end if you use HashRouter.
well, you would have to do the routing in BrowserRouter as well. It's more the interaction of the API. So for example, let's say I had my API was returning a list of tasks, right? Well, if I use HashRouter, if I go to my task, so if my URL is user / tasks, well then at the same time that it triggers whatever it is on my React project to display those tasks, my URLs for /tasks would also get triggered. So it would return that information all at once. But now, if I use HashRouter, I would have to use either a use effect or a loader function to be able to trigger my /tasks, get all of those tasks from my backend and load them through HashRouter. Whereas in BrowserRouter, we'll just have that interaction happening as I go into that individual URL.
So if you had, you'd have to use like a loader function with axios calls.
Correct.
Instead of just the URL. Okay. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions over anything we covered today? Okay, great. I'm going to stop the recording and I'll stick around for an extra 5 minutes in case anyone has any questions. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate your participation.